Chapter 15. Mr. Pendeski filled the canteens. Warden got a pitchfork out of the back of the pickup. She spoke it through X-ray's dirt pile to see if anything else might have been in there as well. After you drop off X-ray, I want you to bring back 3 wheelbarrows, she said. X-ray got in the pickup. As the truck pulled away, he leaned out the wide window and waved. 0, said the warden. I want you to take over X-ray's hole. She seemed to know that 0 was the fastest digger. Armpit and Squid, you will keep digging where you have been. But you're going to be a helper? Zigzag. You help Armpit, Magnet will help Squid. And Caveman, you'll work with 0. You're going to dig the dirt twice. 0 will dig out the hole. Caveman will carefully shovel it into the wheelbarrow. Zigzag will do the same for Armpit, and Magnet will do the same with Magnet and Squid. We don't want to miss anything. If either of you find anything, you will both get the rest of the day off and a double shower. When the wheelbarrows are full, you are to dump them away from this area. You don't want any dirt piles to get in the way. The warden remained at the site for the remainder of the day, along with Mr. Pendeski and Mr. Sir, who showed up after a while. Occasionally, Mr. Sir would have to take water to the other group of campers, but otherwise he and the water truck stayed parked there. The warden saw to it that nobody in Group D was ever thirsty. Stanley did as he was told. He carefully looked through all the dirt dug up by 0. He shoveled it in the wheelbarrow, and he knew he couldn't find anything. It was easier than digging his own hole. When the wheelbarrow was full, he took it a good distance away before dumping it. The warden couldn't keep still. She kept walking around, looking over the boy's shoulders, sticking her pitchfork into the dirt piles. You're doing fine, just fine, she told Stanley. After a while, she told the boys to switch places so that Stanley, Zigzag, and Magnet dug in the holes, and 0, Armpit, and Squid excavated dirt into the wheelbarrows. After lunch, 0 took over digging again, and Stanley returned the wheelbarrows. There's no hurry, the warden said several times. The main thing is not to miss anything. The boys dug until each hole was well over 6 feet deep and wide. Still, it was easier for 2 boys to dig a 6 feet hole than it was 1 boy to dig a 5 feet hole. All right, that's enough for today, the warden said. I've waited this long, I can't wait another day. Mr. Stir drove her back to her cabin. I wonder how she knew all our names, Stanley said as he walked back to the compound. She watches us all the time. She got hidden microphones and cameras all over the place. In the tents, the rec room, and the shower. The shower? Asked Stanley. He wondered if Zigzag was just being paranoid. The cameras are tiny, no bigger than the toenail on your little toe. Stanley had doubts about that. He didn't think they could make cameras that small. Microphones, maybe. He realized that why X-ray didn't want to talk to him about the gold tube at breakfast. X-ray was afraid the warden might have been listening. One thing was certain. They weren't just digging to build character. They were definitely looking for something. And whatever they were looking for, they were looking in the wrong place. Stanley gazed out across the lake towards the spot where he had been digging yesterday when he found the gold tube. He dug into his memory. As Stanley entered the rec room, he could hear X-ray's voice from all the way across the room. I see what I'm saying? X-ray said. Am I right or am I right? The other bodies in the room were little more than bags of flesh and bones. thumped across broken chairs and couches. X-Ray was full of life, laughing and waving his arms around as he talked. "Yo, caveman, my man," he called out. Stanley made his way across the room. "Hey, slide over, Squid," said X-Ray. "Make room for the caveman." Stanley crashed on the couch. He had looked for a hidden camera in the shower. He hadn't seen anything, and he hoped the warden hadn't either. "What's the matter?" said X-Ray. "You guys tired or something?" He laughed. "Hey, keep it down, will ya?" groaned Zigzag. "I'm trying to watch TV." Stanley glanced uncertainly at Zigzag, who was staring at very intensely at the busted television screen. The warden greeted the boys at breakfast the next morning and then went to them to the holes. 4 dug in the holes, and 3 tempted the wheelbarrows. "Glad you're all here, X-Ray," she said to him. "We need your sharp eyes." Stanley spent more time pushing wheelbarrows than digging because he's such a slow digger. He carted away the excess dirt and dumped it previously dug holes. He was careful not to dump it in anywhere where the gold tube was actually found. He could still see the tube in his mind. It seemed so familiar, but he just couldn't place it. He thought it might have been the lid of a fancy gold pen. KB could have been the initials for a famous author. The only famous author that could you think of was Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare, and Mark Twain. It didn't really look like the top of a pen. But lunchtime, the warden was beginning to lose her patience. She made them eat quickly so they could get back to work. "If you can't get them to work any faster, she told Mr. Sir, "then you're going to have to climb down there and dig with them." After that, everyone worked faster, especially when Mr. Sir was watching them. Stanley practically ran when he pushed his wheelbarrow. Mr. Sir reminded them they weren't Girl Scouts. They didn't quit digging until every other group had finished. Later, as Stanley spat across an unshuffled chair, he tried to think of a way to tell the warden the tube was really found without getting himself or X-Ray in trouble. It didn't seem possible. He even thought about sneaking out at the night and digging in that hole by himself. But the last thing he wanted to do after digging all day was to dig at the night, too. Besides, the shovel were locked up at night. Presumably, no, they couldn't be used as weapons. Mr. Pendeski entered the rec room. "Stanley?" he called as he made his way to him. "His name is Caveman," said X-Ray. "Stanley," said Mr. Pendeski. "My name is Caveman," said Stanley. "Well, I have your letter from someone named Stanley Yelton," said Mr. Pendeski. He turned over an envelope in his hand. "It doesn't say Caveman anywhere." Thanks," Stanley said, taking it. It was from his mother. "Who is it from? Your mother?" Stanley put it in the pocket of his hands. "Aren't you gonna read it to us?" asked Armpit. "Give him some space," said X-Ray. "If Kevin doesn't want to read it to us, he doesn't have to. It's probably from his girlfriend." Stanley smiled. He read it later, after the other boys had gone to dinner. "Dear Stanley, it was wonderful to hear from you. Your letter made me feel like one of the other moms who can't send their kids to summer camp. I know it's not the same, but I am very proud of you trying to make the best of a situation. Who knows, maybe something good will come of this. Your father thinks he's really close to a breakthrough on a sneaker project. I hope so. The landlord is threatening to evict because of the odor. I feel sorry for the little old lady who lived in a shoe. It must have smelled awful. Love from both of us." "What's so funny?" Zero asked. It startled him. He thought Zero had gone to dinner with the others. "Nothing, just something my mom wrote." "What did she say?" Zero asked. Nothing? Oh, sorry, said Zero. Well, see, my dad is trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. So the apartment kind of smells bad because he's cooking these old sneakers. So anyway, in the letter that my mom said, she felt sorry for that old lady who lived in a shoe. Maybe because it smelled bad in there. Zero stared blankly at him. You know the nursery rhyme? Zero said nothing. You have heard of the nursery rhyme when the old lady lived in the shoe. Stanley was amazed. No, Stanley was amazed. How does it go? Didn't you ever watch Sesame Street? Zero stared blankly. Stanley headed on to dinner. He could have felt pretty silly recruiting nursery rhymes at Camp Green Lake. For the next week and a half, the boys continued to dig around the area where X-Ray had supposedly found a gold tube. They widened X-Ray's hole as well as the hole Armpit and Squid had been digging, until the fourth day when all three holes met and formed one big hole. As the days wore, Warden came less and less patient. She arrived later in the morning and left earlier in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the boys continued to dig later and later. This is no bigger than when I left you yesterday, she said after arriving one late morning. Well, after sunrise. What have you been doing there? Nothing, said Squid. It was the wrong thing to say. At that moment, Armpit was returning from a bathroom break. How nice of you to join us, she said. And what have you been doing? I had to go, go. The warden jabbed Armpit with her pitchfork, knocking him backwards into the big hole. The pitchfork left 3 holes in his shirt and tiny spots of blood. You're giving these boys too much water, the warden told Mr. Pendeski. They continued to dig until late afternoon, long after the other groups had finished for the day. Stanley was down in the big hole along with 6 other boys. They had stopped using wheelbarrows. He dug his shovel into the side of his hole and scooped some dirt and was raising it to the surface when Zigzag's shovel caught him in the head. He collapsed. He wasn't sure if he passed out or not. He looked to see that Zigzag's wild head was staring down at him. I ain't digging that dirt up, Zigzag said. That's your dirt. Hey, Mom, Magnet called. Caveman's been hurt. Stanley brought his finger up the side of his neck. He felt his wet blood and pretty big gash below his ear. Magnet helped Stanley to his feet and then up and out of the hole. Mr. Sir made a bandage out of pieces of his sack sunflower seeds and taped it over Stanley's wound. Then he told him to get back to work. It isn't nap time. When Stanley returned to the hole, Zigzag was waiting for him. That's your dirt. You have to dig it up. It's covering up my dirt. Stanley felt a little dizzy. He could realize a small pile of dirt. It took him a moment to realize it was the dirt which had been on his shovel when he was hit. He scooped it up and dug his shovel into the underground where Stanley's dirt had been. Chapter 18. The next morning, Mr. Sir marched the boys to another section of the lake, and each boy dug his own hole 5 feet deep and 5 feet wide. Stanley was glad to be away from the big hole. At least now he knew how much he had to dig for the day, and it was a relief not to have other shovels swing past his face or the warden hanging around. He dug his shovel into the dirt and slowly turned it into a pile. He had to make his turn smooth and slow. He jerked too quickly. He felt a troubling pain just above his neck where Zigzag's shovel hit him. That part of the head between his neck and his ear was considerably swollen. There were no mirrors in camp, but he imagined he looked like had a hard-boiled egg sticking out of him. He remembered of his remainder of his body hardly hurt at all. His muscles had strengthened and his hand was tough called. He was still the slowest digger, but not all much slower than Magnet. Less than 30 minutes after Magnet returned to camp, Stanley spat into his hole. After his shower, he put his dirty clothes in his crate and then got a box out of stationery. He turned into the tent to write a letter so Squid and the other boys wouldn't make fun of him for writing to his mother. Dear Mom and Dad, camp is hard but challenging. Yeah, I've been running over an obstacle course and swim long distances on the deck. Tomorrow we learn. He stopped writing and Zero walked into the tent. Then he returned to his letter. He didn't care what Zero thought. Zero was nobody. To rock climb, I know it sounds crazy, but don't worry. Zero was standing beside him now, watching him write. Stanley turned to his left and felt his neck throb. I don't like it when you're reading over my shoulder, okay? Zero said nothing. I'll be careful. It's not all fun and games here, but I think I'm getting a lot out of it. Builds character. The other boys, I don't know how, said Zero. What? Can you teach me? Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Teach you what? To rock climb? Zero stared at him with penetrating eyes. What? Said Stanley. He was hot, tried, and short. I want to learn how to read and write. Right. Stanley let out a short laugh. He wasn't laughing at Zero. He was surprised. All this time, he had thought Zero was reading over his shoulder. Sorry, he said. I don't know how to teach. After digging all day, he didn't have the strength to teach Zero to read and write. He needed to save his energy for the people who counted. You don't have to teach me how to write. Me how to write. I just to read. I don't have to write to anybody. Sorry, said Stanley again. His muscles and hand were the only part of his body that had toughened over the past several weeks. His heart had hardened as well. He finished his letter. He barely had any moisture in his mouth to seal the envelope. It seemed that no matter how much water he drank, he was always thirsty. Chapter 19. He was awakened one night by a strange noise. At first, he thought it might have been some kind of animal, and it frightened him. But as the sleep cleared from his head, he realized that it was a noise coming from the cot next to him. Squid was crying. You okay? Stanley whispered. Squid's hand jerked around. He sniffed and caught his breath. Yeah, I'm fine. He whispered and sniffed again. In the morning, Stanley asked Squid if he was feeling better. What are you, my mother? Asked Squid. Stanley lowered one shoulder. I got allergies, okay? Squid said. Okay. You open your mouth again, and I'll break your jaw. Stanley kept his mouth shut most of the time. He didn't talk too much to any boys, afraid that he might say the wrong thing. They called him caveman and all that, but he couldn't forget that they were dangerous too. They were all here for a reason, and Mr. Sir was saying this wasn't a Girl Scout camp. Stanley was thankful that there were no radical problems. X-Ray, Armpit, and Zero were black. He, Squid, and Zigzag were white. Magnet was his happening. On the lake, they were all the same reddish-brown color, the color of dirt. He looked up from his hole to see the water truck and it was trailing dust cloud. His canteen was almost a quarter full. He drank it down, then took his plate in line, behind Magnet and in front of Zero. The air was thick with heat, dust, and exhaust fumes. Mr. Sir filled their canteens. The tow truck pulled away. Stanley was back in his hole, shovel in hand, when Magnet called out, "Anyone want some sunflower seeds?" Magnet was standing at ground level holding a sack of seeds. Popped a handful into his mouth, chewed and swallowed, shells and all. "Over here," called X-Ray. The sack looked to be half full. Magnet rolled up top and then tossed it to X-Ray. "How did you get them without Mr. Sir seeing you?" asked Armpit. "I can't help." He held up both hands, wiggled his fingers. "My fingers are just like magnets." The sack went from X-Ray to Armpit to Squid. "I'm sure good to eat something doesn't come from a can," said Armpit. Squid tossed the sack to Zigzag. Stanley knew it would come to him next. He didn't even want it. For the moment, Magna shouted, "Anyone want some sunflower seeds?" He knew there would be trouble. Mr. Sir was sure to come back. And anyway, the salted shells would only make him thirsty. "Coming your way, caveman," said Zigzag. Airmail and special delivery. It was unclear when the seeds spilled before they got to Stanley and after he dropped the bag. It seemed to him that Zigzag hadn't rolled up the top before throwing it, and that was the reason he didn't catch it. But it all happened very fast. One moment, the sack was flying through the air. The next moment, he knew that the sack was in his hole and the seeds spilled across the dirt. "Oh man," said Magnus. "Sorry," Stanley said as he tried to sweep the seed back into the sack. "I don't want to eat dirt," said X-Ray. Stanley didn't know what to do. "The truck's coming," shouted Zigzag. Stanley looked at the approaching dust cloud. Then he looked down at the spilled seed. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What else is new? He dug his shovel into his hole and tried to dig dirt buried shovels. What he had done, he realized later, was knock one of his dirt piles back into his hole. But the idea that putting dirt in his hole was unthinkable. "Hello, Mr. Sir," said X-Ray. "Back so soon? It seemed like you were just here," said Armpit. "Time flies when you're having fun," said Magnet. Stanley continued to turn the dirt over his hole. You Girl Scouts having a good time?" asked Mr. Sir. He moved from one hole to another, kicked dirt piles by Magnet's hole, then he moved towards Stanley. Stanley could see two seeds at the bottom of the hole. As he tried to cover him up, he unhearded a corner of the sack. "Well, what do you know, caveman?" said Mr. Sir, standing over him. "Look like you found something." Stanley didn't know what to do. "Dig it out. We'll take it to the warden. Maybe she'll give you the rest of the day off." "It's not anything," Stanley muttered. "Let me be the judge of that," said Mr. Sir. Stanley reached down and pulled the empty barrel sack. Mr. Sir, but he wouldn't take it. "So tell me, caveman, how did you get the sunflower seed get in your hole?" "I stole it from your truck." "You did?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." "What happened to all the sunflower seeds?" "I ate them." "By yourself?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." "Hey, caveman," shouted Armpit. "How come you didn't share any with us?" "That's cold, man," said X-Ray. "I thought we were our friend." Mr. Sir looked around from one boy to another, then back to Stanley. "We'll see what the warden has to say about this. Let's go." Stanley climbed up out of his hole and followed Mr. Sir to his truck. He still held the empty sack. Felt it good to sit inside of the truck, out of the direct rays of the sun. Stanley was surprised he'd feel good in any way at the moment, but he did. It felt good to sit down on a comfortable seat for a change. And as the truck bounced along the dirt, he was able to appreciate the air blowing through the open window on his hot, sweaty face. Chapter 20. This is the end of this video. Bye!